The man carrying a ripped couch through a snowstorm looked nothing like someone who owned half of New York. The wind howled between the narrow Brooklyn buildings, rattling old fire escapes and sending loose snow swirling across the empty street like torn paper. Olivia Carter pulled her coat tighter around herself as she stepped out of the corner deli with a paper bag of instant noodles and canned soup pressed against her chest. It was almost midnight, and the neighborhood looked half asleep beneath the pale yellow glow of flickering streetlights. The old apartment building across from her groaned softly in the cold, pipes knocking somewhere deep inside the walls like a tired heartbeat. Olivia climbed the cracked front steps carefully, her boots wet from slush, already dreading another night of unpaid bills spread across her kitchen table. The elevator had been broken for 3 weeks. Of course it had. Everything in this building broke eventually. She reached the lobby just as the front door slammed open behind her. Cold air rushed in. A tall man stumbled backward through the doorway, carrying one side of a worn brown couch balanced awkwardly against his shoulder. Snow clung to his dark hair and melted across the collar of his charcoal hoodie. For a second, he froze there, breathing hard, one hand gripping the couch while the other tried to push the door shut with his foot. Olivia blinked. The man looked completely out of place. Not because he looked rich. Quite the opposite. His jeans were faded. His boots were scratched. One sleeve of his hoodie had white paint stains near the wrist. But there was something about him that didn't fit the building. Something calm. Controlled. Like a man pretending not to stand out. The couch nearly slipped from his shoulder. "Okay," Olivia muttered, setting down her grocery bag. "You seriously need help." He looked up quickly, almost surprised she'd spoken. His eyes were blue. Sharp blue. The kind that seemed too clear for this exhausted city. "I've got it," he said, though the couch immediately tilted again. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Sure you do." Before he could protest, she grabbed the other end. The couch was heavier than she expected. "Jesus," she gasped. "What is inside this thing?" "Bricks." A quiet laugh escaped him then. Low. Real. Like he hadn't done it in a while. "Feels like it." Together they maneuvered the couch through the narrow hallway, bumping into peeling walls and crooked mailboxes. Somewhere upstairs, a baby cried. Someone's television blasted an old sitcom through paper-thin walls. Olivia adjusted her grip. "Which floor?" "4th." She stopped walking. "You're kidding." He shook his head once. "Afraid not." Olivia stared at him for a beat before laughing under her breath. "You picked the worst building in Brooklyn." "That bad?" "Last winter the heat disappeared for 9 days and management gave us space heaters like that was supposed to fix emotional damage." Another small smile touched his face. God, he was handsome. Not in a polished Manhattan way. Not like the men in expensive wool coats rushing through Midtown with AirPods and $1,000 watches. No, this man looked tired. Human. Like someone carrying too much by himself for too long. They started climbing the stairs together slowly. By the 2nd floor, Olivia's arms burned. "You moving in alone?" she asked. "Yeah." No friends willing to help. Not tonight. There was something strange about the way he said it. Not bitter. Just factual. Like loneliness had become routine. Olivia swallowed the question forming in her throat. On the 3rd floor landing, the couch nearly slipped again. His hand shot out fast, steadying both the couch and her at the same time before she lost balance on the icy step. Warm fingers brushed her wrist for half a second. "Careful," he said softly. Olivia looked up. Their faces were suddenly too close. Snowflakes melted slowly in his dark hair. For one strange moment, the entire noisy building seemed to disappear around them. Then someone upstairs yelled, "Keep it down," and reality snapped back into place. Olivia laughed awkwardly and kept climbing. By the time they reached the 4th floor, both of them were breathing hard. Apartment 4B, directly across from hers. "No way," Olivia said. "You're the new neighbor?" "Looks like it." He pushed the apartment door open with his shoulder. The room inside was nearly empty except for a few taped moving boxes, a lamp sitting on the floor, and large windows overlooking the snowy street below. Olivia stepped inside carefully. The apartment looked colder than the hallway somehow. Temporary. Like nobody had really lived there in years. Together they set the couch down near the wall. The man exhaled deeply and rubbed the back of his neck. "Thanks," he said. "You probably just saved my spine." Olivia smirked. "I charge $20 an hour for emergency furniture rescues." That same quiet laugh again. Softer this time. real enough that it warmed something unexpectedly deep inside her chest. He reached into his back pocket instinctively, almost automatically, then stopped himself. For the first time, he looked uncertain, like he'd nearly revealed something he shouldn't. "I'm Ethan," he said instead, offering his hand. Olivia noticed his hands immediately. Clean nails, strong fingers, no wedding ring, but definitely not the hands of someone unemployed. Olivia. His grip was warm despite the freezing weather outside. Somewhere downtown, a distant siren echoed through the city. Olivia glanced around the apartment again. "You seriously picked this place on purpose?" Ethan leaned against the wall casually. "I like neighborhoods that still feel real." She laughed under her breath. "Give it a month." But Ethan's eyes drifted toward the snow falling outside the window. "Maybe real is exactly what I've been looking for." Something about the way he said it made Olivia pause. Not flirtatious, not dramatic, honest, like the sentence had been sitting inside him for years. Her phone buzzed suddenly in her coat pocket. Rent reminder, final notice. The warmth inside her chest disappeared instantly. Reality again. Bills. Freelance deadlines. Her landlord threatening late fees she couldn't afford. Olivia shoved the phone away before Ethan could see the screen. "Well," she said lightly, stepping toward the door. "Welcome to the world's most dysfunctional apartment building." Ethan watched her quietly. "You live across the hall?" "Unfortunately." "Good." The word caught her off guard. "Good." He nodded once, almost to himself. "At least I know one person here now." Olivia felt heat rise unexpectedly into her cheeks. Which was ridiculous. She barely knew this man. Yet standing there beneath the dim apartment light, with snow tapping softly against the windows, Ethan somehow made the lonely old building feel quieter, safer, like maybe the winter outside couldn't quite reach this room. She cleared her throat quickly. "Try not to freeze tonight. The radiator screams like it's possessed around 3 a.m. I'll survive." Olivia headed toward the hallway, but just before she stepped out, she glanced back once more. Ethan stood alone beside the battered couch, hands in his pockets, staring out over Brooklyn like a man hiding from something bigger than the snowstorm outside. And Olivia had no idea that only 12 hours earlier, the same man had walked out of a Manhattan skyscraper after signing a deal worth $3 billion. The first thing Olivia noticed about Ethan Blackwood was that he never seemed to sleep. 3 nights after helping him move into apartment 4B, she lay awake at nearly 2 in the morning with her laptop balanced on her knees, staring at an unpaid electric bill glowing against the dark room. Outside, snow slid slowly down the fire escape. Somewhere in the distance, a subway train rumbled beneath Brooklyn like a tired machine refusing to quit. Olivia rubbed her eyes and looked toward the ceiling as the soft sound of piano music drifted through the wall beside her. She froze. It was faint at first. Slow notes. Careful notes. The kind of melody that sounded unfinished and lonely at the same time. Not polished like a concert pianist. Human. Hesitant. Like someone remembering something painful while trying not to. Olivia slowly lowered her laptop screen. The music continued softly through the paper-thin apartment wall. For reasons she could not explain, it made the room feel less empty. Less cold. She glanced toward the clock glowing red beside her bed. 2:13 in the morning. "Who plays piano at 2 in the morning?" she muttered quietly. But she did not hate it. Not really. The melody stumbled once. Restarted. Then continued softer than before. Olivia stood up carefully and walked toward the shared wall between their apartments. "You missed a note," she called lightly. Silence. For a second she thought maybe he had not heard her. Then Ethan's voice came through the wall. Low. Amused. "That obvious?" Olivia smiled before she realized she was smiling. Painfully. A quiet laugh echoed back. "I'm a little out of practice." Olivia leaned her shoulder gently against the wall. "How long?" There was a pause. "A few years." "You used to play professionally?" "No," another pause. "My mother liked piano." Something about the way he said mother made Olivia stop asking questions. The city outside groaned softly beneath winter wind. Pipes knocked somewhere overhead. Upstairs neighbors argued faintly over something involving laundry. Normal Brooklyn soundtrack. Yet somehow this strange conversation through an apartment wall felt oddly intimate. "You cannot sleep either?" Ethan asked finally. Olivia laughed under her breath. "Freelance illustrator. My entire career exists because insomnia exists." "What are you working on?" She looked toward the unfinished sketches spread across her tiny kitchen table. Restaurant logos, a half-finished children's book illustration, cheap jobs that barely covered groceries. Nothing glamorous, she admitted. What about you? Silence again, long enough that she thought he might not answer. I work with buildings. Olivia frowned slightly. Buildings. Real estate. Architecture sometimes. That sounds important. Ethan's voice softened. Not as important as people think. The answer stayed with her long after the conversation faded. The next morning, Olivia nearly spilled coffee all over herself when she opened her apartment door and found a blue ceramic mug sitting on the floor outside. Steam still curled softly from the top. A sticky note rested against the handle. For surviving my piano playing. Ethan. Olivia stared at the note for a second before laughing quietly to herself. The mug was old and slightly cracked near the rim. Definitely not expensive. But the coffee smelled incredible. Real coffee. Not the sad dollar store kind she usually drank at midnight. She picked up the mug carefully and looked across the hall. Ethan's door was already closed. For the rest of the day, she could not stop thinking about him. Which annoyed her. A lot. Because attractive, mysterious neighbors in Brooklyn were never simple. They either had emotional damage, secret girlfriends, startup podcasts, or all three. By Thursday evening, snow had turned to freezing rain. Olivia stood inside the tiny laundromat down the block, feeding quarters into a washing machine while sketching absent-mindedly inside her worn notebook. The place smelled like detergent and overheated metal. Neon lights buzzed overhead. Outside, rain streaked the windows silver. That looks better than anything hanging in Manhattan galleries. Olivia jumped slightly at the sound of Ethan's voice behind her. He stood near the entrance holding a black umbrella dripping rainwater onto the tile floor. Dark gray coat. Damp hair. Hands shoved into his pockets like he was trying not to take up space. Olivia looked down at her sketchbook quickly. It is just practice. Ethan stepped closer carefully. Can I see? She hesitated before turning the notebook toward him. Sketches of city rooftops filled the page. Fire escapes. Streetlights. Windows glowing warm against snowstorms. Ethan studied the drawings quietly for several seconds. You draw loneliness really well, he said softly. Olivia blinked. Nobody had ever described her art that way before. That is either the nicest thing anyone has said to me or the most concerning. A smile touched his mouth. There it was again. That rare smile that seemed almost accidental on him. Ethan nodded toward the washing machines. Long night. Olivia exhaled slowly. Always. She regretted the honesty immediately. But Ethan did not respond with fake sympathy the way most people did. He just leaned lightly against the machine beside her. Present. Listening. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city. You ever feel like New York is trying to exhaust everyone on purpose? Olivia asked quietly. Ethan looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Every day. Then why stay? For the first time since meeting him, Ethan seemed caught off guard by a question. His jaw tightened slightly before relaxing again. Because sometimes, he said carefully, you build something for so long that you forget how to leave it behind. Olivia frowned slightly at the strange answer. Before she could ask what he meant, the laundromat television mounted near the ceiling suddenly switched from weather updates to business news. A female anchor appeared on screen beneath flashing headlines. Blackwood Holdings expands Brooklyn acquisitions. Olivia groaned immediately. Great. Another billionaire buying neighborhoods people cannot afford anymore. Ethan went still beside her. The television continued. Sources say Blackwood Holdings quietly purchased multiple properties across East Brooklyn this week in a deal estimated near $2 billion. Olivia shook her head angrily. People like that ruin entire communities and call it development. Ethan said nothing. She glanced sideways. His expression had gone unreadable. Calm. Too calm. Sorry, Olivia muttered awkwardly. I just hate hearing stories like that. Ethan stared at the television a second longer before finally speaking. Maybe not every story is that simple. Olivia laughed softly. You defending billionaires now? Ethan's eyes met hers briefly. Something flickered there. Something heavy. Then it disappeared. No, he said quietly. Just saying people usually see headlines before they see people. Before Olivia could respond, her phone buzzed violently in her coat pocket. She checked the screen and felt her stomach drop instantly. Final rent warning. Payment required within 72 hours. Her chest tightened. She quickly locked the screen before Ethan noticed. But he had already seen her expression change. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. Olivia forced a smile immediately. "Yeah, just work stuff." Ethan studied her for half a second too long, like he knew she was lying. But instead of pushing, he simply nodded once. Outside, rain hammered harder against the laundromat windows. Olivia looked back toward the television where the headline "Blackwood" holdings still glowed across the screen beneath the image of a sleek Manhattan skyscraper disappearing into clouds. She did not notice the way Ethan stared silently at the same building with an expression that looked almost like regret. At 3:17 in the morning, the fire alarm exploded through the building like the end of the world. Olivia jolted awake instantly, heart slamming against her ribs as the piercing sound echoed through the apartment walls. Red emergency lights flashed faintly through her bedroom window while footsteps thundered somewhere in the hallway outside. For one disoriented second, she thought she had dreamed it. Then came shouting, doors opening, a baby crying downstairs. "Everybody out!" someone yelled from the stairwell. Olivia threw off her blanket and stumbled toward the window. Snow was falling hard again, thick white flakes spinning beneath streetlights outside the building. The fire alarm screamed louder. "Seriously?" she muttered breathlessly, grabbing the nearest sweater from the floor. Her apartment was freezing. She shoved her feet into boots without socks, pulled her coat over wrinkled pajamas, and rushed toward the hallway just as her front door swung open. Ethan stepped out of apartment 4B at the exact same moment. Their eyes met instantly beneath the flashing red emergency lights. His dark hair looked messy like he had just woken up too. Gray thermal shirt, black sweatpants, no jacket yet. Somehow he still looked annoyingly composed. Olivia pointed accusingly toward the ceiling. "Please tell me this is another broken Brooklyn thing and not actual fire." Ethan listened for half a second. "Smells like burnt wiring maybe. That is somehow worse." Another alarm blared violently through the hallway. A frightened elderly woman from downstairs struggled slowly up the stairwell, clutching a tiny shaking dog against her chest. "I cannot move fast enough," she kept muttering anxiously. Ethan reacted immediately. "Calm. Efficient. Miss Hernandez," he said gently, already moving toward her. "I have got you." Before the woman could protest, Ethan took the small grocery cart she was dragging while steadying her carefully with his other hand. Olivia blinked. "You know everybody already?" Ethan glanced back briefly. "I met her yesterday." Of course he did. The man had lived here less than a week and somehow already knew neighbors by name. Olivia hurried beside them as people flooded down the narrow staircase wrapped in blankets and winter coats. Somebody complained loudly about management. Somebody else threatened to sue. Typical Brooklyn emergency energy. Outside, freezing wind hit them instantly the moment they stepped onto the sidewalk. Snow whipped through the air sideways. Olivia crossed her arms tightly against the cold. Across the street, neighbors gathered beneath the flickering awning of a closed pharmacy while smoke drifted faintly from somewhere near the building basement. Not heavy smoke, more like overheated electrical wires. Still enough to send panic through everybody standing barefoot in the snow at 3 in the morning. Ethan helped Miss Hernandez sit carefully on a bus bench before pulling his own coat around her shoulders without hesitation. "No," the older woman protested weakly. "You need this." "I run warm." Ethan lied smoothly. Olivia watched the exchange silently from a few feet away. Snow collected slowly in Ethan's dark hair again, while he crouched beside the frightened woman and adjusted the blanket around her tiny dog too. The scene felt strangely intimate beneath the frozen city lights. Real, not performative kindness, just instinctive kindness. Olivia suddenly became aware of how many people in New York avoided eye contact every single day. Yet Ethan noticed everything. "You okay?" Ethan's voice pulled her back suddenly. Olivia realized he was looking directly at her now. "Yeah," she answered quickly. "Just cold." Without a word, Ethan stepped closer and handed her a pair of black gloves from his coat pocket. Olivia frowned slightly. "You carry extra gloves around?" "Habit. Weird habit." "You are shivering." Olivia hesitated before taking them. The inside felt warm from his hands. "Thanks." A fire truck finally turned onto the street several minutes later, red lights washing across snow-covered buildings. Firefighters disappeared into the basement while exhausted tenants waited outside, complaining into phones. Olivia stood beside Ethan beneath the pharmacy awning watching snow pile along parked cars. For some reason, the silence between them no longer felt awkward. "You always this calm during emergencies?" she asked eventually. Ethan looked toward the building thoughtfully. "Panic usually makes things worse." "That sounds suspiciously like rich person advice." A small smile appeared again. "And what does poor person advice sound like?" Olivia shoved her hands deeper into his gloves. "Complain loudly and hope somebody else fixes it." Ethan laughed quietly beneath his breath. God, that laugh again. It kept catching her off guard. The kind of laugh that made him suddenly seem younger than whatever age he really was. More human, less guarded. Across the street, two college students argued dramatically over whether the fire alarm had interrupted a date. Someone cursed at the landlord. A cab splashed through slush too fast. Brooklyn continued existing around them like always. Ethan glanced sideways toward Olivia. "How long have you lived here?" "Almost 4 years." "That long?" "I moved in after college because the rent was cheap." She paused briefly. "Well, cheapish." Ethan studied the building quietly. "And you stayed?" Olivia followed his gaze upward toward the old cracked windows and rusted fire escapes. "I do not know," she admitted softly. "I think after a while people get attached to places that survive with them." Ethan looked at her differently after that. Not flirtatious, not pitying, just attentive, like the sentence mattered more than it should have. A firefighter finally emerged from the building entrance, waving casually toward the crowd. "Electrical issue only," he announced. "No fire. Everybody can head back inside." A collective groan rose from the freezing tenants. Olivia laughed tiredly and turned toward the entrance with everyone else. "Congratulations," she muttered. "You officially survived your first near-death Brooklyn building experience." Ethan walked beside her slowly through the falling snow. "Feels like an important milestone." The stairwell smelled faintly like smoke and wet coats as tenants climbed back upstairs half asleep. On the third-floor landing, Olivia nearly slipped on melted snow near the railing. Ethan caught her arm instantly before she lost balance completely. Warm hand around her wrist again. Steady. Familiar now somehow. Neither of them moved for half a second. Olivia became painfully aware of how close he stood beside her in the narrow stairwell. Snow melted slowly across his shoulders. His blue eyes searched her face briefly, like he almost wanted to say something. Then voices echoed below them, and the moment vanished just as quickly. Ethan released her carefully. "Careful," he murmured. Olivia swallowed once. "Apparently, I am terrible at stairs around you." Another faint smile. By the time they reached the fourth floor, the hallway had gone quiet again except for distant pipes rattling somewhere behind the walls. Ethan unlocked his apartment door slowly. Olivia lingered outside hers for a second longer than necessary. "Thanks for the gloves," she said softly. "Keep them. What if you freeze to death?" Ethan leaned lightly against the doorway. "Then at least somebody will remember me fondly." Olivia laughed before she could stop herself. The sound echoed softly through the empty hallway. Ethan watched her with an expression she could not quite read. Tired maybe, or lonely, or both. Then his phone buzzed suddenly inside his apartment. Ethan glanced toward the screen on the kitchen counter. For the first time since meeting him, Olivia saw genuine irritation flash across his face. The screen lit up brightly enough for her to catch a glimpse of several words before he turned it over immediately. "City acquisition meeting, 8 a.m. Olivia frowned slightly. Ethan noticed. "Work," he explained too quickly. "Right." She stepped backward toward her own door. But before disappearing inside, Olivia glanced at him one last time standing there beneath the dim hallway light, with snow still melting in his dark hair and a billion thoughts hidden behind those impossible blue eyes. She still believed Ethan Blackwood was just another overworked man trying to survive New York. She had absolutely no idea that by sunrise, half the city's most powerful developers would be sitting across a $12 million conference table waiting for him to decide the future of her entire neighborhood. You can tell how exhausted someone is by the way they stare at microwave dinners in grocery stores. Olivia realized the thought the moment she saw Ethan standing alone in the frozen food aisle 2 nights later. The little neighborhood market near their building buzzed softly with fluorescent lights and tired customers escaping the cold February rain outside. It was almost 10 at night, the kind of hour where everyone looked emotionally defeated under grocery store lighting. Olivia pushed her cart slowly past shelves of canned soup, calculating prices in her head while pretending not to panic about the $73 left in her checking account. Rent was due tomorrow morning. Her freelance client still had not paid her invoice, and the tiny notification from her bank app sitting unread on her phone felt heavier than the groceries in her basket. Then she spotted Ethan near the freezer section staring at two different frozen pizzas like the decision might alter human history. Olivia smiled despite herself. Please tell me the mysterious building guy is not losing a battle against pepperoni pizza. Ethan looked up immediately. His expression softened the second he saw her. That still surprised her every time. Like some invisible weight on him eased whenever she appeared unexpectedly. Thin crust feels dishonest somehow, he said seriously. Olivia laughed quietly and stepped beside him. You are dramatically overthinking frozen pizza. I overthink most things. That explains the 2-minute stare. Ethan glanced down at her basket. Instant ramen. Generic cereal. A single apple. His jaw tightened almost invisibly before he looked away again. Olivia pretended not to notice. You always grocery shop this late? He asked. Late-night shopping means less people judging my financial choices. Ethan's mouth twitched slightly. And here I thought the ramen was a bold, artistic statement. Olivia placed one hand dramatically against her chest. Excuse you. This ramen carried me emotionally through college. Ethan picked up a second basket from beneath the cart stack near the aisle entrance without saying anything. Then he quietly started placing actual groceries inside it. Eggs, bread, coffee, fresh fruit. Olivia stared. What are you doing? Improving your survival odds. Ethan. He kept moving casually through the aisle like this was perfectly normal behavior. You need food that did not come from a shelf labeled emergency apocalypse supplies. Olivia crossed her arms immediately. I cannot afford all that. Ethan looked at her calmly. I did not say you were paying. There it was. The dangerous part about Ethan Blackwood. He never sounded arrogant. Never acted flashy. He offered help the way most people offered napkins. Quietly. Naturally. Like caring for people was instinct instead of performance. Which somehow made it harder to refuse. Olivia shook her head firmly. No. Absolutely not. Ethan leaned lightly against the cart handle. Why? Because I barely know you. You know I play piano badly. That is not enough information to accept charity. His expression changed slightly at the word charity. Not offended exactly. More like disappointed. I was not offering charity. Olivia looked away awkwardly toward the freezer doors glowing cold blue beside them. Rain tapped softly against the store windows outside. Somewhere near the registers, a cashier laughed tiredly at something on her phone. New York kept moving around them, while silence settled briefly between them again. Ethan spoke softer this time. Sometimes people just want to help. Olivia swallowed once. The problem was she knew that look in his eyes. The look of someone who understood struggle too personally to pity it from a distance. And somehow that felt more dangerous than judgment. You always try rescuing random neighbors? She asked quietly. Ethan looked down at the groceries in the basket before answering. Not usually. Something more moved through her chest before she could stop it. Olivia quickly grabbed the loaf of bread from his basket and shoved it back onto the shelf. One coffee, she negotiated. That is all. Ethan considered this seriously. And the eggs. One coffee. The eggs are important. You sound like somebody's exhausted father. Ethan laughed softly beneath his breath again. God, that laugh was becoming a problem. 15 minutes later, they stood together in the checkout line, while Olivia tried very hard not to think about how natural this felt. Like they had done this before. Like maybe loneliness recognized itself across crowded grocery stores. Ethan paid before she could protest further. The cashier barely glanced up while scanning items. But Olivia noticed something strange. The second Ethan pulled out his wallet, the cashier's eyes widened almost imperceptibly before dropping back down immediately. Ethan noticed too. His shoulders tightened slightly. Olivia frowned. The wallet looked ordinary enough. Dark leather. Nothing flashy. Yet something about the interaction shifted the air around him instantly. Outside, cold rain soaked the sidewalks silver beneath streetlights. Ethan carried both grocery bags despite Olivia arguing twice about it. They walked side by side beneath his umbrella through the narrow Brooklyn street, while passing glowing laundromats and crowded corner bars humming with late-night conversations. So, Olivia asked eventually, what exactly do you do in real estate? Ethan glanced toward traffic moving slowly through rain. Mostly development. That sounds suspiciously vague. It is boring. People who say their jobs are boring usually have weird jobs. A faint smile appeared. And what would qualify as weird? Olivia thought for a second. Taxidermy. Cult leader. Billionaire. Ethan nearly missed a step beside her. Olivia laughed immediately. Wow, that reaction was way too strong. I just think billionaires sound exhausting. Exactly. Olivia pointed dramatically at him beneath the umbrella. Finally, common ground. Ethan shook his head quietly, but the corner of his mouth still held that restrained smile. They reached their building just as thunder rolled faintly somewhere beyond Manhattan. The old neon sign from the liquor store across the street reflected red across puddles near the entrance. Olivia paused beneath the awning while Ethan adjusted the grocery bags in his hands. Thanks, she said softly. For the coffee. And the eggs, apparently. Ethan looked at her for a second longer than usual. You do not have to thank me for basic human decency. Olivia smiled faintly. You would be surprised. The hallway smelled like wet coats and old radiator heat when they stepped inside. Somewhere upstairs, someone practiced terrible trumpet scales. Ethan handed her one grocery bag outside apartment 4A. Their fingers brushed briefly again. Small moment. Small touch. Yet somehow it lingered. Olivia unlocked her apartment door slowly. You know, she said carefully, you are weirdly difficult to figure out. Ethan leaned lightly against the opposite wall beneath the dim hallway light. Maybe I am still figuring myself out too. Olivia looked at him quietly then. Really looked at him. The tiredness hidden beneath his calm expression. The loneliness that seemed to appear whenever he thought nobody noticed. Whatever world Ethan came from, it clearly weighed on him heavier than he admitted. Well, she said softly, for what it is worth, Brooklyn already likes you more than most landlords. Ethan smiled properly this time. Not small, not restrained. Real enough that it completely changed his face. Olivia's breath caught for half a second before she recovered. Dangerous. Very dangerous. She slipped inside her apartment quickly before her expression betrayed her completely. But just as the door began closing, Ethan's voice stopped her. Olivia. She looked back. Ethan stood motionless in the hallway, one hand still holding the umbrella dripping rainwater onto the old wooden floor. Do you ever think people can start over? The question caught her completely off guard. Start over how? Ethan's eyes drifted briefly toward the rain-streaked hallway window at the far end. As somebody else. Silence settled softly between them. Olivia frowned slightly, studying him. I do not think anybody becomes somebody else, she answered honestly. I think they just finally become who they were before the world exhausted them. Ethan stared at her after that like she had accidentally said something important. Something painfully important. Then slowly, almost to himself, he whispered, maybe that is what I am trying to do. And for the first time since meeting Ethan Blackwood, Olivia began wondering if the man living across the hall was not hiding success from the world. Maybe he was hiding from himself. By the second week of March, Ethan had somehow become part of Olivia's routine without either of them meaning for it to happen. It started with coffee, then hallway conversations, then midnight piano through apartment walls. Little things. Small things. The dangerous kind of things that quietly begin to matter before you realize they do. On Tuesday evening, Olivia sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by unfinished sketches while rain tapped steadily against the windows. Her tiny radiator hissed weakly in the corner like it was fighting for its life. The apartment smelled faintly like pencil shavings and cheap takeout noodles. Olivia stared at her laptop screen in frustration. Another rejected pitch. Another polite email thanking her for her creative submission before choosing somebody else with more experience. Or connections. Or stability. She slammed the laptop shut harder than intended. Fantastic, she muttered. Love that for me. A soft knock sounded through the wall beside her. Not at the door. The wall. Olivia blinked once before knocking back, twice automatically. Silence. Then Ethan's voice came through softly. Bad night. Olivia leaned her head back against the couch cushion and sighed dramatically. Apparently, every company in New York suddenly hates art. Unlikely. You are right. They probably just hate me specifically. Also unlikely. Olivia smiled despite herself. You always this optimistic? A pause. No, something about the honesty in his voice made her sit up slightly. Then why now? Silence stretched for a moment longer this time. Because I think you are better than you think you are. Olivia stared quietly at the wall between them. The sentence landed harder than it should have. Nobody had said something like that to her in a very long time. Not sincerely. Well, she answered lightly after a second. That was annoyingly kind. Ethan laughed softly through the wall. I try occasionally. Another crack of thunder rolled outside over Brooklyn. Rain streaked silver across the windows while headlights moved below like blurred rivers of light. Olivia glanced toward the old blue ceramic mug Ethan had given her sitting beside the sink. She had started using it every morning without even thinking about it, which felt strangely intimate somehow. What are you doing over there anyway? She asked. Working. At 10:30 at night? Some meetings run late. Olivia frowned slightly. You work from home a lot for somebody in real estate. Another pause. I'm trying something different for a while. That sounds mysterious. Maybe I am mysterious. Olivia laughed under her breath. No. Mysterious people do not buy frozen pizza and carry extra gloves. Ethan's quiet laugh echoed through the wall again. The sound settled warmly inside her chest before she could stop it. Dangerous. Definitely dangerous. The next afternoon, Olivia sat inside a crowded coffee shop downtown, trying to finish sketches for a restaurant rebranding project, when her phone buzzed violently against the table. She glanced down and immediately felt her stomach tighten. Building ownership transfer notice. Olivia opened the email quickly. Her eyes moved faster across the screen with every sentence. Property management changes. Redevelopment discussions. Lease reevaluations. Possible future renovations. Her pulse quickened instantly. No, she whispered under her breath. Around her, espresso machines hissed and customers typed on laptops, completely unaware that her entire sense of stability had just cracked open in one email. Olivia grabbed her coat immediately and rushed back toward Brooklyn through freezing wind that smelled like rain and subway smoke. By the time she reached the apartment building, anxiety sat heavy beneath her ribs. Several tenants already crowded the lobby, arguing loudly near the mailboxes. This is how it starts, one man snapped angrily. First renovations, then rent hikes. I cannot afford another increase, somebody else muttered. Olivia pushed through the crowd until she reached the bulletin board near the stairs. A fresh notice hung there beneath flickering lights. Property under review for development acquisition. Olivia felt sick. Her apartment was tiny, old, falling apart half the time. But it was hers. The first place that had ever felt remotely stable after years of drifting through tiny rentals and temporary jobs. You okay? Ethan's voice behind her nearly startled her. Olivia turned sharply. He stood near the entrance holding 2 coffees in a cardboard tray, dark coat damp from rain outside. Calm as always. Too calm. Did you know about this? She asked immediately, gesturing toward the notice. Ethan's eyes flicked briefly toward the paper. Something unreadable crossed his face before disappearing. I heard rumors. Rumors? Olivia laughed bitterly. People are going to lose their homes. Ethan stepped closer carefully. Nothing has happened yet. That is what rich developers always say right before they destroy neighborhoods. The words came out harsher than intended. Ethan went still. Not angry. Just quieter somehow. Olivia exhaled sharply and rubbed her forehead. Sorry. I am just stressed. Ethan handed her one of the coffees silently. Warmth pressed against her cold fingers. You care about this place, he said softly. Of course I care. Olivia looked around the worn-out lobby with peeling paint and broken tile floors. People act like buildings are disposable just because poor people live inside them. Ethan studied her carefully. And what do you think a home is? The question caught her off guard. Olivia looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. Steam curled softly upward between them. I think, she said slowly, a home is the place that still lets you exist when the rest of your life falls apart. Silence settled heavily after that. Ethan looked at her like she had unknowingly hit something fragile inside him again. It kept happening. These strange moments where his expression changed for half a second before he hid it away beneath calmness. Olivia frowned slightly. What? Ethan shook his head once. Nothing. But it clearly was not nothing. Upstairs, somebody slammed an apartment door hard enough to shake the hallway pipes. Voices echoed angrily through the stairwell as tenants discussed possible rent increases. Anxiety filled the building like smoke. Ethan glanced toward the noise briefly before lowering his voice. Come upstairs with me. Olivia blinked. What? Just for a minute. Something in his expression made her follow him without arguing. Ethan led her up to the rooftop access door at the end of the fourth-floor hallway. Cold wind hit them instantly the second he pushed it open. Brooklyn stretched endlessly beneath gray evening skies while rain clouds rolled slowly above Manhattan in the distance. The city looked cold, endless, lonely. Ethan walked toward the edge of the rooftop quietly with both hands inside his coat pockets. Olivia joined him beside the railing. "You come up here a lot?" she asked. "Sometimes." "Why?" Ethan stared out toward the skyline for several seconds before answering. "Because from up here," he said softly, "the city almost looks honest." Olivia looked at him carefully. Wind moved through his dark hair, while traffic lights flickered below like distant stars. There was sadness in him tonight. Real sadness. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just heavy. "You really hate your job that much?" she asked gently. Ethan laughed once beneath his breath, without humor. "Some days I do not even know what my job is anymore." Olivia frowned. "What does that mean?" Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "It means sometimes people build things because they think success will fix them." He looked down toward the streets below. Then one day they wake up surrounded by buildings they do not even recognize. Olivia stayed quiet. The city wind carried distant sirens across the rooftops while rain threatened again overhead. "And what happens then?" she asked softly. Ethan looked at her finally. Blue eyes tired beneath the gray Brooklyn sky. "Then they start wondering if it is too late to become someone else." Olivia's chest tightened unexpectedly. Because for one impossible second, Ethan did not sound like a man talking about work. He sounded like a man confessing something. The first time Olivia saw Ethan angry, he was standing in the rain outside their apartment building staring at a man in a $3,000 suit. It happened on a Thursday evening just after sunset. Brooklyn streets glistened beneath fresh rain while headlights reflected across puddles like broken gold. Olivia had just returned from a disastrous client meeting in Manhattan, where a marketing executive spent 40 minutes explaining why her illustrations needed to feel less human and more algorithm-friendly. She was still muttering insults under her breath while climbing the block toward her building when she noticed the black luxury SUV parked illegally beside the curb. The vehicle looked absurdly out of place in their neighborhood. Glossy black paint, tinted windows, driver waiting inside wearing an earpiece. Olivia slowed instinctively. Then she saw Ethan standing near the entrance beneath the awning. His posture was different tonight. Straighter somehow. Colder. The man facing him held a leather folder against his chest while rain collected across the shoulders of his expensive wool coat. "You cannot keep delaying this," the suited man said sharply. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I already told the board I need more time." Olivia stopped walking immediately when she heard the word board. The suited man lowered his voice, but frustration still cut through clearly. "The acquisition announcement is scheduled Monday morning. Investors are already expecting confirmation." Ethan glanced toward the street briefly before answering. "Then tell them to wait. That is not how a $2 billion redevelopment works." Olivia froze. $2 billion? Rain tapped steadily against umbrellas passing on the sidewalk, while her stomach twisted with sudden confusion. The suited man continued speaking. "The mayor is expecting you at tomorrow's dinner." Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "Cancel it. You have already canceled twice." "Then cancel it again." The suited man exhaled sharply like this conversation had repeated too many times already. "Ethan." Olivia's breath caught slightly at the change in tone. "Not professional. Personal. Familiar. You disappearing into Brooklyn pretending to be anonymous is not fixing whatever this is." Ethan stepped closer. Calm on the surface. Dangerous underneath. "Go home, Daniel." Silence stretched between them beneath cold rain and glowing streetlights. Finally, the man named Daniel shook his head once in visible frustration before handing Ethan the leather folder. "You have until Monday," he muttered. Then he glanced briefly toward Olivia, standing frozen halfway down the sidewalk. His eyes narrowed slightly with curiosity before he disappeared into the waiting SUV. The vehicle pulled away seconds later, tires slicing through rainwater. Ethan remained motionless beneath the awning with the folder in one hand. Olivia stared at him from across the sidewalk while 1,000 thoughts collided inside her head. $2 billion redevelopment. Board meetings. Investors. Luxury SUVs. Nothing about it matched the exhausted man eating frozen pizza beside her in grocery stores. Ethan looked up finally and noticed her standing there. For the first time since meeting him, Genuine surprise crossed his face. Olivia. She stepped closer slowly. Who was that? Ethan glanced toward the disappearing SUV before answering carefully. Work. Olivia laughed once in disbelief. Your version of work is getting stranger every week. Rain dripped steadily from the awning above them, while traffic hissed through wet streets nearby. Ethan rubbed one hand across the back of his neck like he was deciding how much truth to give her. Daniel handles some business matters for me. Business matters involving $2 billion deals. Ethan's silence answered too much already. Olivia studied him carefully. Dark coat. Expensive watch she had somehow never noticed before. Calm posture that suddenly looked less like exhaustion and more like control. Pieces started shifting inside her head uncomfortably. Ethan, she said slowly, what exactly do you do? His blue eyes met hers beneath the rain-soaked city lights. I told you. Real estate. Nobody says investors and board meetings about normal real estate. Ethan looked away briefly toward the street. It is complicated. Olivia crossed her arms tightly against the cold. That is usually what people say right before explaining something terrible. A faint smile almost appeared before disappearing again. Not terrible. Then explain it. Ethan stayed quiet too long. The silence itself became suspicious. Olivia felt frustration rising unexpectedly beneath her ribs. Because part of her already knew this conversation mattered more than it should. You know what? She muttered finally. Forget it. She stepped past him toward the building entrance. Ethan reached out instinctively and caught her wrist gently before she disappeared inside. Warm hand. Familiar now. But tonight it stopped her differently. Olivia. His voice softened immediately. I am trying. She looked down briefly at his hand around her wrist before meeting his eyes again. Trying what? Ethan hesitated. The rain around them suddenly sounded louder somehow. Trying to figure out how to tell you things without changing this. Her chest tightened unexpectedly at the sentence. This, whatever this had become between them. Midnight conversations. Grocery stores. Rooftops. The strange comfort of someone understanding your loneliness before you explain it. Olivia swallowed once. You make it sound like I should be worried. Ethan's expression shifted again. That same sadness she kept catching in him lately. Maybe I am worried. Silence settled heavily between them. Upstairs, somewhere through the old building walls, somebody played music too loudly. A dog barked. New York continued moving around them, while neither of them stepped away. Olivia looked at him carefully. You know what the weirdest part is? She asked softly. Ethan waited. You still do not feel like a liar. That seemed to affect him more than she expected. His fingers loosened slowly around her wrist. I have lied about some things, he admitted quietly. But not about you. Olivia's heart betrayed her with one painful heavy beat. Rain slid slowly down the side of Ethan's face while city lights reflected in his eyes. For one dangerous second, the space between them felt too small, too charged. Ethan looked like he wanted to say something else, something bigger. But before he could, the lobby door behind them burst open suddenly. Miss Hernandez stepped outside holding her tiny dog wrapped in a pink sweater. Oh good, she sighed dramatically. Young people. My television stopped working again. Olivia blinked instantly, the moment shattered. Ethan stepped backward smoothly, emotional walls sliding back into place almost immediately. I will take a look, he said gently. Miss Hernandez beamed. You are a saint, Ethan. Olivia watched him follow the elderly woman back inside while rain continued falling softly across the street. The strange tension from moments ago still lingered heavily in her chest. Because no matter how confusing Ethan Blackwood became, one thing was impossible to ignore now. Men who casually discussed billion-dollar deals with luxury executives did not move into crumbling Brooklyn apartments for no reason. And whatever reason Ethan had for being here, it was getting harder for him to hide. Nobody looks at a billionaire the same way after they learn his name. Olivia heard the sentence in her head 3 days later while sitting across from Ethan in a tiny 24-hour diner on Flatbush Avenue. The thought unsettled her because she still did not know if it was true. Outside, cold rain blurred the city into streaks of red taillights and glowing signs. Midnight crowds moved past the diner windows bundled in coats, while steam rose from subway grates into the freezing air. Inside, the smell of coffee and grilled onions filled the small room, while an old jazz song hummed softly through ceiling speakers. Ethan sat across from her in the booth wearing a dark sweater beneath his coat, one hand wrapped loosely around a coffee mug. Calm. Composed. Like always. Too composed. Olivia stirred cream into her coffee absently while watching him over the rim of her cup. You have been staring at me for 5 minutes, Ethan said without looking up from the menu. Olivia blinked. I have not. You absolutely have. Maybe I am trying to figure out if you secretly work for the government. A quiet smile touched his mouth. And, honestly, you give off deeply suspicious energy lately. Ethan folded the menu shut slowly. That sounds serious. Olivia leaned forward slightly across the booth. You disappeared for 14 hours yesterday. I was working. Then you came home in a suit that probably costs more than my rent. Ethan glanced down briefly at the charcoal jacket folded beside him. You notice my clothes now? Olivia immediately regretted the comment. That is not what I meant. But Ethan's eyes softened slightly anyway. Dangerous. Again. The waitress arrived with pancakes and eggs while Olivia tried to ignore the warmth climbing into her face. Ethan thanked the waitress by name before she walked away. Olivia noticed that too. He always noticed people. Always remembered names. You know, Olivia said carefully once they were alone again. You are very strange for a rich person. Ethan paused with his coffee halfway to his mouth. Interesting assumption. Come on. Olivia gestured vaguely toward him with her fork. Nobody accidentally ends up in billion-dollar conversations. Ethan leaned back slightly against the booth. And if I told you money does not fix nearly as much as people think? Olivia snorted softly. That sounds exactly like something a rich person says. Ethan laughed under his breath. Fair point. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the diner windows while neon signs reflected red and blue across wet pavement. Olivia watched Ethan quietly for a second longer. He looked exhausted tonight beneath the warm diner lights. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Like something invisible followed him everywhere. Can I ask you something honestly? She said softly. Ethan nodded once. Why here? His expression shifted slightly. Brooklyn. This building. This neighborhood. You could clearly live literally anywhere else. Ethan stared down into his coffee for several seconds before answering. Because nobody here knew who I was. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. Olivia stayed quiet while the diner buzzed softly around them. Plates clattered. Somebody laughed near the counter. New York moving endlessly through another cold night. Ethan finally looked back up. Do you know how exhausting it is, he asked quietly, when every conversation changes the second people recognize your last name? Olivia frowned slightly. That bad. A humorless smile appeared briefly. People either want something from you or want to destroy you. Sometimes both. The sentence landed heavier than she expected. Suddenly she understood certain things differently. The guardedness. The loneliness. The way Ethan always looked relieved when nobody asked too many questions. So you came here to disappear? She asked gently. Ethan looked out the rain-streaked window beside them. I came here because I wanted one place in my life that felt real again. Olivia's chest tightened unexpectedly. Because she believed him. Completely. That scared her more than anything else. Before she could answer, Ethan's phone buzzed sharply against the table. The screen lit briefly between them. Daniel calling. Ethan's expression darkened instantly. He silenced the phone without answering. Olivia noticed. Your billionaire friend again? Ethan rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw. Something like that. The phone buzzed again immediately. Then again. Ethan stared at the screen for a long second before finally standing from the booth. I need to take this. Olivia nodded quietly while Ethan stepped outside beneath the diner awning into cold rain. Through the fogged glass window, she watched him answer the call with visible frustration tightening his shoulders. I said no, she heard faintly through the glass. Silence. Ethan's jaw hardened. Then tell them they can wait. Another pause. I do not care what the investors think anymore. Olivia frowned slightly from inside the booth. The rain outside distorted everything, but she could still see the tension in Ethan's posture clearly now. Whatever world he came from, it was pulling harder lately. Ethan ran one hand through his wet hair while listening to whoever spoke on the other end of the line. Then suddenly his expression changed. Not anger this time. Something worse. Defeat. No, he said quietly into the phone. Do not touch the Brooklyn properties until I say so. Olivia's stomach tightened immediately. Brooklyn properties. Her building. Her neighborhood. Ethan turned slightly, then, and noticed her watching through the diner window. For half a second, something vulnerable crossed his face before he looked away again. The call ended moments later. Ethan stood motionless beneath the rain for another few seconds before finally returning inside. Water dripped slowly from his coat as he slid back into the booth across from her. Olivia studied him carefully. "Everything okay?" Ethan looked exhausted suddenly. Older somehow beneath the diner lights. "No," he admitted quietly. The honesty startled her. Ethan usually dodged emotional questions with calm half-smiles and careful answers. Tonight he looked too tired to pretend. Olivia lowered her voice slightly. "Do you want to talk about it?" Ethan stared down at the untouched coffee in front of him. "Do you ever feel like your entire life became something you never intended?" Olivia blinked softly at the question. Ethan laughed once beneath his breath, without humor. "Sorry. Ignore that." "No," Olivia leaned forward slightly. "You can tell me." Ethan looked at her then. Really looked at her. Rain slid slowly down the diner windows, while midnight traffic blurred outside like rivers of light. "I built something very big," he said carefully. "And somewhere along the way I stopped recognizing the person running it." Olivia stayed completely still. Because for the first time since meeting Ethan, she realized he was not trying to impress her. He was confessing something. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Ethan's eyes held hers across the small diner booth. Tired blue eyes carrying far too much weight. "I do not know," he admitted quietly. "But I know if I go back completely, I lose this." Olivia's breath caught slightly. This. Again. Whatever existed between them now. Ethan looked like he regretted saying it immediately. He looked away first, jaw tightening subtly. The waitress returned with the check at exactly the wrong moment, shattering the fragile silence between them. Ethan reached automatically for the bill. Olivia narrowed her eyes immediately. "Absolutely not." Ethan looked genuinely confused. "Why?" "Because rich, mysterious men do not get to emotionally devastate me and buy pancakes at the same time." For the first time all night, Ethan laughed properly. Warm. Real. Tired but real. And Olivia realized with sudden terrifying clarity that she was already in deeper than she should have been. Olivia knew she was in trouble the moment she started listening for Ethan's footsteps in the hallway. It happened unconsciously at first. The sound of his apartment door closing in the mornings. The quiet piano drifting through the wall after midnight. The low murmur of his voice when he spoke to neighbors downstairs. Somewhere between late-night diner conversations and rooftop confessions beneath freezing skies, Ethan Blackwood had become the first thing she noticed in every room. And that terrified her. Sunday evening arrived wrapped in cold wind and silver clouds rolling over Brooklyn rooftops. Olivia sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, painting details onto a half-finished bookstore mural proposal while old jazz music hummed softly from her tiny speaker. Her hair was tied messily above her head. Paint stained one sleeve of her sweater. Empty coffee cups crowded the kitchen counter beside overdue bills she kept pretending not to see. For the first time in weeks, the apartment felt calm. Then someone knocked gently against her front door. Olivia looked up instantly. She somehow already knew it was Ethan before opening it. He stood in the hallway wearing a dark coat over a charcoal sweater, one hand tucked inside his pocket, while snowflakes melted slowly in his hair. "You disappeared all day," he said quietly. Olivia blinked once. "Were you keeping track?" Ethan's expression shifted into that faint, almost smile she was becoming dangerously addicted to. "Maybe." Olivia stepped aside automatically to let him in before fully processing the fact that she was letting him in. Ethan paused just inside the apartment doorway, looking around carefully. Not judging. Observing. Her sketchbooks stacked near the couch. Paintbrushes soaking inside old coffee mugs. String lights glowing softly around the windows because the overhead light flickered too much to use comfortably. "You have somehow made this apartment feel bigger than it is," he said. Olivia laughed softly. "That is called strategic denial." Ethan walked slowly toward the wall covered in pinned sketches and unfinished illustrations. "These are incredible." Olivia suddenly felt shy. Ridiculous. "Most clients disagree." Ethan turned toward her immediately. "Then your clients are idiots." The certainty in his voice startled a laugh out of her before she could stop it. God, he did that constantly. Slipped kindness into conversations like he did not even realize how rare it was. Ethan studied one charcoal sketch pinned near the window for several quiet seconds. It showed an old Brooklyn rooftop during winter, lights glowing warm behind apartment windows, while snow fell softly across fire escapes. Lonely but beautiful. This one, he said quietly, feels like home. Olivia looked at the drawing differently after hearing him say it. You really think so? Ethan glanced back at her. I think you draw places the way people wish they remembered them. The room went strangely still after that. Outside, wind brushed softly against the windows while traffic murmured below the building. Olivia's chest tightened unexpectedly beneath the weight of his words. Because Ethan always seemed to see things other people missed, including her. You know, she said carefully, you are very intense for somebody who pretends frozen pizza is a personality trait. Ethan laughed quietly and leaned one shoulder against the wall beside her sketches. I am trying to seem approachable. You fail occasionally. Good to know. Silence settled softly between them again. Comfortable silence now. The kind that no longer needed filling. Ethan's eyes drifted toward the old blue ceramic mug sitting near her paint supplies. The same cracked mug he had left outside her door weeks ago. You kept it, he said softly. Olivia looked down at the mug. It has weirdly become my emotional support coffee cup. Ethan smiled fully then, warm enough to make her pulse stumble painfully for a second. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Before Olivia could recover, the lights suddenly flickered once overhead. Then everything went dark. Oh, come on. Olivia groaned immediately into the darkness. Outside, the entire block disappeared into sudden blackness, while distant voices echoed from neighboring apartments. Power outage. Again. Ethan laughed softly somewhere near the window. Brooklyn charm. Brooklyn suffering. Olivia fumbled blindly through a drawer near the kitchen until she found 2 candles and a lighter. A few moments later, warm candlelight flickered softly across the apartment walls, painting everything gold and shadowed. Ethan sat beside the window while snow drifted silently outside beyond the glass. The atmosphere changed instantly in the candlelight. Quieter. Closer somehow. Olivia handed him one of the candles carefully before sitting across from him on the floor beside the couch. So, she said softly, tell me one honest thing about yourself. Ethan looked amused. Only one. Start small. You are emotionally terrifying enough already. He laughed under his breath again before growing quieter. Thoughtful. Okay. Ethan stared into the candle flame for a second. I hate penthouses. Olivia blinked. That is an oddly specific confession. They are lonely. You have been inside a lot of penthouses? Ethan's eyes lifted toward her slowly. More than I wanted to be. There it was again. Another answer that explained nothing and somehow everything at the same time. Olivia studied him carefully in the flickering candlelight. Who hurt you? She asked before she could stop herself. Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. Then something sad crossed his face briefly. Mostly myself. The honesty in his voice hit her harder than she expected. Outside, snow continued falling softly across darkened Brooklyn streets while the building creaked gently around them. Olivia lowered her gaze toward the candle in her hands. I used to think success would fix everything too, she admitted quietly. Ethan looked at her immediately. What happened? Olivia smiled faintly without humor. Turns out being talented does not magically make people stay. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence followed. Ethan's expression softened instantly. Someone left. Olivia nodded once. A few years ago. She shrugged lightly like it no longer mattered. He said loving an artist felt exhausting because I was always chasing unstable dreams. Ethan's jaw tightened subtly. That was stupid of him. Olivia laughed softly. Well, he probably has health insurance now, so maybe he won. Ethan looked at her for a long moment in silence. Then quietly, carefully, he said, I do not think anyone who made you feel small won anything. Olivia forgot how to breathe for half a second. Candlelight flickered across Ethan's face while snow drifted outside the windows behind him. The apartment suddenly felt too warm, too quiet, too close. Ethan seemed to realize it too because his gaze dropped briefly toward her mouth before immediately pulling away again. Olivia's pulse jumped painfully. Dangerous. The silence stretched heavier now, charged in a way neither of them seemed prepared for. Then somewhere downstairs, the building generator kicked violently back to life. Lights flickered on overhead. The moment shattered instantly. Olivia blinked against the sudden brightness while Ethan leaned back slightly like he had just remembered something important. Reality returning too fast. Ethan stood slowly. I should go. Olivia nodded, even though disappointment hit her immediately. Right. Ethan moved toward the door, but paused before leaving. His hand rested briefly against the doorknob while he looked back at her one last time. Olivia? Yeah. Ethan hesitated. For the first time since meeting him, he looked genuinely uncertain. Vulnerable even. If things become complicated soon, he said quietly, just remember none of this was fake for me. Olivia's heart stopped cold for one terrifying second. What does that mean? Ethan held her gaze silently, blue eyes full of things he still was not telling her. Then softly, almost painfully, he answered, I think you already know. And before Olivia could ask another question, Ethan Blackwood walked back across the hallway into apartment 4B while the sound of piano music returned softly through the wall only 20 minutes later. Olivia stopped trusting peaceful moments after Ethan's warning on Sunday night. Something had shifted between them in the candlelight. Something too honest to ignore now. And somehow that made everything feel fragile. By Wednesday morning, Brooklyn woke beneath cold gray skies and the uneasy feeling that storms were coming even without rain. Olivia stood in line at the neighborhood coffee shop scrolling absently through local news headlines on her phone while half listening to conversations around her. Then one headline made her freeze completely. Blackwood Holdings expected to announce major East Brooklyn redevelopment this week. Olivia stared at the screen while her stomach tightened painfully. Beneath the headline sat a photo of a Manhattan skyscraper reflecting silver clouds across glass windows. She recognized the name instantly now. Blackwood Holdings. The same company from the news. The same company buying buildings across Brooklyn. The same company Ethan kept getting mysterious phone calls about. A cold feeling settled heavily beneath her ribs. Next, the barista called impatiently. Olivia blinked quickly and stepped forward automatically, still staring at the article. Her coffee order barely registered in her own ears. By the time she walked back outside onto the crowded sidewalk, the article already had thousands of comments underneath it. Luxury apartments. Commercial redevelopment. Modernization projects. Olivia's chest tightened harder with every sentence. Because her neighborhood was directly inside the highlighted redevelopment zone, including her building. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Ethan, you awake? Olivia stared at the message for several long seconds before replying. Olivia, unfortunately. Ethan, roof in 10 minutes? She should have said no. Instead, 10 minutes later, she pushed open the rooftop access door into cold morning wind, carrying the smell of snow and traffic. Ethan stood near the edge of the rooftop wearing a dark coat over black slacks, one hand wrapped around a coffee cup, while Manhattan stretched behind him beneath heavy clouds. He looked exhausted already. Olivia noticed immediately. You look terrible, she said as she approached. Ethan glanced sideways at her. Good morning to you too. Olivia crossed her arms tightly against the wind. I saw the article. Ethan went still. Not surprised. Just still. Okay, he said quietly. You knew it would upset me? Yes. Olivia laughed once bitterly. At least you were honest. Ethan looked down toward the streets below. I have been trying to be. The answer irritated her more than it should have. Then stop speaking in riddles all the time. Ethan finally turned toward her fully. Wind moved through his dark hair while tension pulled tightly across his jaw. What do you want me to say, Olivia? The truth. Silence. Heavy silence. Ethan looked like a man standing at the edge of something dangerous. The truth, he repeated quietly. Olivia nodded once. Ethan exhaled slowly and looked away toward Manhattan again before speaking. Blackwood Holdings owns the redevelopment contracts for this neighborhood. Olivia felt her pulse spike instantly. There it was. Finally spoken out loud. So it is true. Ethan's jaw tightened. Partly. Olivia stepped closer. People are terrified they are going to lose their homes. I know. Do you? The frustration in her voice cracked harder now. Because from where I am standing, it sounds like rich people are deciding poor people are inconvenient again. Ethan flinched almost imperceptibly at the sentence. Olivia noticed. You said you hated penthouses, she continued. You said you wanted something real. But you are still connected to all of this. Ethan stared at her silently for several painful seconds. Then quietly, carefully, he said, You think I do not know exactly what people like me destroy sometimes. The words hit harder than she expected. Because for the first time, Ethan did not sound defensive. He sounded guilty. Wind rushed sharply across the rooftop, while distant sirens echoed somewhere below. Olivia looked at him differently now. Ethan, she asked softly, Who are you really? He closed his eyes briefly like the question physically hurt. Then suddenly his phone buzzed loudly in his coat pocket. Ethan pulled it out automatically, glanced at the screen, and muttered something under his breath. Olivia caught the name this time clearly. Mayor Hastings. Her stomach dropped instantly. Ethan silenced the call without answering. Olivia stared at him. Why is the mayor calling you? Ethan looked trapped for the first time since meeting him. Actually trapped. Olivia. No. She stepped backward immediately. No more vague answers. Ethan moved toward her instinctively. Listen to me. You know what is crazy? Olivia laughed shakily. I still do not even know if Ethan Blackwood is your real life or your fake one. Pain flashed briefly across his face. Real pain. You are the only thing in my life right now that feels real. The sentence landed like a punch to her chest. Ethan stepped closer slowly. I never meant for this to happen. Olivia's heartbeat turned painfully uneven beneath the cold rooftop wind. What exactly is this? Ethan looked at her in silence for one unbearable second too long. Then his voice dropped softer. Honest. You. Everything inside her seemed to stop moving at once. Manhattan glittered faintly in the distance beneath gray winter clouds while the city roared far below them. Ethan stood close enough now that she could see exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. Loneliness too. And something else. Something dangerously close to love. Olivia swallowed hard. You cannot say things like that while hiding half your life from me. Ethan's voice lowered further. I know. Silence stretched tightly between them. Neither moved away. Ethan looked down briefly toward her mouth before catching himself again. Olivia's pulse jumped painfully. Not because he touched her. Because he almost did not trust himself to. Then suddenly the rooftop door slammed open behind them. Olivia. Miss Hernandez appeared breathless beside the entrance holding her tiny dog. There are reporters downstairs. Both Olivia and Ethan turned instantly. Reporters? Olivia repeated. Miss Hernandez nodded anxiously. They are asking questions about redevelopment and Blackwood Holdings. Ethan's entire expression changed immediately. Walls returning. Calm returning. Distance returning. Olivia watched it happen in real time and realized something terrifying. Ethan had practiced hiding himself for years. He turned toward her quietly. You should stay upstairs for now. Olivia stared at him. Why? Ethan hesitated only half a second too long. Because if they see me with you. He stopped himself. But the damage was done already. Olivia's chest tightened painfully. See you with me is what? Ethan's silence answered louder than words. Down below on the street, camera flashes suddenly lit against nearby windows. Reporters. News vans. Voices echoing faintly upward from the sidewalk. Ethan looked toward the noise briefly before meeting Olivia's eyes again. I need you to trust me a little longer. Olivia stared at the man standing in front of her beneath the freezing Brooklyn sky. The man who played piano through apartment walls at 2 in the morning. The man who bought her groceries without making her feel small. The man whose phone calls involved mayors and billion-dollar redevelopment plans. The man she was already falling for despite every warning sign screaming not to. And for the first time since meeting Ethan Blackwood, Olivia realized she was no longer scared he might be lying to her. She was scared the truth might finally arrive.